Good evening, the news gang is here, and tonight, from disease-infected zone to a hotspot zone, the mutating COVID-19 containment measures, the story of the Delta variant in the Lake region, and the villages too. Also, Nasayeye, has the opposition captured a new ally from the big house, or is the DP just tweeting? Plus, east or west, which is best? The central question around the mountain. And 1, 2, 3 testing, BVR kits, voter register, Form 34, returning officers, polling stations. You get it, yes. We are back there, but are we ready to roll? The memo goes in search of the missing Kenyans and the missing humanity. On Yvonne's take, Africa is not rising. The kicker, why IBC must get it right next year. Gashuri goes for the money in the counties. And on the angle tonight, the equality of all schools in Kenya. Do you believe it?
I have done much more than I was able to do even in my first term. Why? Because I have been able to focus myself, working in conjunction with my colleagues, and being able to focus on the development agenda, not the political agenda.
All right, that's the president there speaking about the state of that handshake and the parties and allies in there. And we'll come back to that in just a short moment. But ladies and gentlemen, today the government announcing new measures around the Lake region. 13 counties, I think they were, now declared not DIZ the way we were here, but hotspot zones. Not any better, because the positivity rate there has been going through the roof, Yvonne.
Yeah, at an average of over 20% in this region, when the national average is at about 9%. And really interesting, just a quick anecdote on what is happening in the region. We know that there's many people who provide labor in the city, in the big cities, who after our disease-infested zone was reopened, who had been out of work, going back to the village. And I think we're having the discussion that many of them have ties with the village, and so every month they're going back home and coming back this way. And for them, after the first closure, people going back home, and this continues to spread in that region, and so it's been a bit of a tough time for them there. And then there's also the issue of stigma, which our reporter Laura Otieno spoke about in the region. I think for many of them, what sticks in their minds is that burial. Remember the one at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in Siaya, where let's not even talk about it, but I think many remember how inhumane it was, and that there's many people who get infected and don't come out to speak, and so that continues to spread. And so, the issues of stigma, the issues of the travel back and forth, for many of them who have ties both in the village and in the city, is something to worry about, considering the spread. And we'd heard that this was going to happen, including Matiang'i saying just yesterday that, they were considering some stringent measures, and here they are. So, let's see what happens in the wake of the vaccinations that are beginning to be a challenge.
Linus, what stands out for you?
This is the nightmare scenario that as Kenyans we must have feared all this time. Remember, since the outbreak of COVID-19, rural areas were not really a big concern, and that was something we were grateful about, that it is the urban centers, Nairobi, Mombasa, but not the rural areas. And now these 13 counties, a majority of them are rural countries, deep rural counties. And what this obviously means is, if it worsens, then we really don't have the kind of facilities out there that we do have in the big urban centers. And this is a test to the counties, because 13 in one go. Remember the last time we had a big concern about the spread of COVID-19. It was about the 5 counties, Nairobi, Nakuru, Kajiado, Kiambu, and
Machakos.
And Machakos. So this is huge. We just need to hope that it doesn't worsen. Then, of course, there'll be questions about what really transpired, because the spread comes not too long after the Madaraka Day celebrations that were held in Kisumu. And remember, a few days before Madaraka Day celebrations, we had this report that the variant has landed in Kisumu. I think it was 5 people that had come from India, and some ended up in Kisumu. So we will end up, if it worsens, obviously, identifying Madaraka Day as a potential super spreader event.
Jamila?
Yes, Joe, I think today's numbers tell it all. Siaya is leading with 123 cases, Kisumu 102, and Nairobi is third with 78. This was almost unheard of a few months back. I think in the past 2 weeks, we've had counties from that region, either Siaya or Kisumu or Homa Bay, leading in infections almost on a daily basis. And that's a situation that we had not expected, because walikuwa nasema hii ni ugonjwa ya Nairobi, because most of the COVID-19 infections were there. And remember that this area, the Lake region, is one of the most densely populated in the country. I think there are about 14 million people who live in that area. That's about approximately 30% of the entire population. And when that region accounts for almost 50% of total infections, overtaking Nairobi and the other cities, it's worrying. Also looking at now the facilities in terms of hospital beds, ICU beds. Do they have oxygens? Do they have the personnel that they read there? Do they have PPEs? Do they have equipment such as the pulse oximeters that you're told are important for those suffering from who have COVID-19. So there needs to be, I think, up-to-date information on what these facilities are, whether they have them, and what can be done so that we're able to contain the situation. And I think also the other worry that comes up, of course, with what's happening in that region is now the issue of vaccines. We talked about this last time, Joe, saying that the solution for COVID-19 is vaccines, which we currently don't have. In fact, we had medical personnel who had gotten the text message telling them come for the second dose, going and being told hakuna chanjo, hakuna vaccine. So watu wafanye nini? Do what we always say: wash your hands, maintain social distancing, wear your mask, and at least avoid places where kunaweza kuwa na issues of watu kujazana and all that. You speak about Madaraka Day, potential super spreader. So I think for people in that region now, please just take care of yourself. Take care of yourself, because as you've said, this COVID-19 is there, and now it's the Delta variant, the one from India, that is spreading in that region, according to Dr. Patrick Amoth.
Focus now, Joe, is on the enforcement of the measures that were announced by the government today. They look quite serious. The barriers, that particularly markets, and even discouraging what they consider unnecessary movement. Actually, the containment measures announced today, it could have been worse. Actually, the worst was feared that there was a potential lockdown looming in that region. But you see, the government only fell short of declaring that cessation of movement, like it did in the 5 counties that were declared DIZ. But obviously, where the country is, you have to battle between lives and livelihoods, because locking that region, like we saw in Nairobi, Machakos, Kajiado, Kiambu, and Nakuru, there were economic consequences. So you're dealing with those you're trying to avert those economic consequences, but at the same time well aware of the situation that we face. And this is also a confirmation of what we spoke about sometimes back here, that when the Minister for Health went around the country, inspecting and confirming the state of preparedness in counties, some counties misled him. Some counties lied. We know some counties even got beds from private institutions and paraded them to show how prepared they were. Now, this is a perfect example of how prepared is our country to deal with the situation, because now the rural counties are affected. So how well prepared are they? Lastly, the Council of Governors says next week they are likely to shut down. And you can imagine what the situation will look like for the 13 counties in that region if the resources that they are expecting from the National Treasury don't come in time. And are the resources there in any case? And thirdly, when the resources get there, what will they be used for? So we are dealing with a very serious situation here, and hopefully the measures will be effective. But personal responsibility, still very, very fundamental.
And that issue of measures being effective, I mean, if there's a region in this country where people travel to and out of, it is that region. I mean, the connection, as Yvonne was saying a little bit earlier, of people from Western and Nyanza region with a village, as it were, is quite strong. I mean, you find that almost every weekend there are people who actually are traveling there. People go there twice a month or that kind of thing. Either they are building something or they're just going to visit people, they're attending a funeral or all kinds of things that go on there. And so it is very possible that travel can really drive infections in that region. And therefore, the fact that there has not been a firm lockdown where, you know, strictly sort of cutting out that part of the country, as you mentioned, huge economic implications with that. But the fact that they are discouraging non-essential travel, I mean, one hopes that that will be heeded, because quite frankly, there's a lot of travel that goes in and out of that region. And if that does not stop, then actually we are ending up with a situation where, remember, Nairobi is still not out of the woods. Nairobi still ranks high up there. I mean, after that zone, you actually come to Nairobi. So that means that the moment you have too much interaction between Nairobi and that region, it means that then we'll have another wave in Nairobi, but driven largely now by the Delta variant, which according to Dr. Moss is easily more transmissible and perhaps more lethal from what
and when it gets to Nairobi, you can imagine what happens thereafter, because Nairobi being the epicenter, guys will still come in and out
and go to every part of the country. So that is something that I think we'll have to watch and see how those are enforced. So they're not just like what we see with curfew now, where it's there in name but hardly enforced. So let's go to this other story about
politics. My community.
I think earlier on we had the president saying actually he's done better in his second term than he did in the first term, essentially saying that he has a bit more peace now to do development and leave politics to other people. Quite an interesting development, Linus, though, considering that first of all, the people who are there, the delegation from Ukambani, but essentially people in the opposition, because I mean, Kalonzo Musyoka, Charity Ngilu, those are not people in government. And if you think about the broader picture of the NASA coalition, then you are basically talking about the opposition. And the president reported to have said things to the effect that he will be happy to support someone from among that group, basically saying, anyone in there, but not his deputy.
I think, Joe, in one of the previous shows, we spent a lot of time talking about the end of formalities in our politics, the absence of structures and things like that, because it should be strange when the president declares that he's having a better term based on his relationship with the opposition, rather than changing dynamics within his own ruling party. But that's where we are, and especially because we have an election coming up, this is exactly how we function. We shouldn't forget that in 2007 itself, when Uhuru Kenyatta was chairman of KANU, he led KANU, the official opposition, to endorse the sitting president. I mean, that has never happened in the Commonwealth history. I mean, where the leader of official opposition then endorses the sitting president. But we are going to see a lot of this. What does this mean? To me, it means end times for Jubilee, because the president really doesn't have a lot of regard for what is in the past, and that past now includes Jubilee. He's looking ahead, and these are hints that he's giving that he's going to work with a new formation. This is not the first time, though. Remember, in the Madaraka Day celebrations, he actually hinted and said, in future, I would work with opposition leader Raila Odinga in a political formation that will include him. I'm paraphrasing this, what he had to say. So this is how the year is going to look like. So we shouldn't look at it as that event alone, but what happens between now and I think the beginning of June next year, when IEBC clears presidential candidates, you will see shifting of positions. And I think what we are going to see also is the emerging of new political formations. And he said this, I think, to appeal also to this group of opposition leaders from Ukambani. It's an invitation that work with me. Let's work together and have this new political formation. So in a nutshell, I think really the president is looking to getting into a new political formation or supporting one that comes from between now and the next election.
And it's so surprising, as you say. I mean, the same way he probably doesn't need Jubilee. I mean, the same way Mwai Kibaki didn't need NAC in 2007, then after PNU ran in 2007, and shortly after, no one even knows what happened to PNU. We don't even know where it went. And that has been the nature of our politics. In the 2007 election that you're talking about, Raila Odinga, who was Mwai Kibaki's chief opponent, had actually been part of the grand coalition called NAC, which actually swept to power and essentially ended Kanu's 40-year rule at the time. So we have interesting gymnastics. Francis, you had a fly on the wall at that State House meeting. and quite a few interesting things coming out of that place. And whereas everybody knew that there was no love lost between the president and the deputy, but this was a little bit more candid than a lot of people expected 13 months to the election.
I think it's a series of that candidness in terms of the relationship between the president and his deputy. That which was said in murmurs is now being said openly.
On mountaintops.
Yeah, it's now being said openly. And I looked at that statement by the president in context. When he says that he has done much more than he did in the first term, he has done much more in the second term than he did in the first term, I read that statement to mean I find it easier now to work with my deputy out of the government, so to say, and with the opposition inside the government, so to say. By inside, I mean a working relationship of sorts. Because, of course, the opposition team would argue that we are not in government, we have not been appointed into government, but there is a working relationship. And so when I heard the president say that he finds it easier now than he did in the first term, so then I had a question. So who was the problem in the first term? Is it the deputy? Is it the president? Or was it the arrangement therein? And number two, what is this that has changed in the second term that has made work easier than it was in the first term? And when I also saw the tweets, the two tweets by the deputy president, then I got a confirmation in my mind that then this is it. That the president is saying anybody else for support other than his deputy. And then, of course, now his deputy, you will see probably a scenario where in the days to come, it will be bare knuckle kind of a contest. Because I think that was, I would think, the most direct response the deputy president has had for the president in many days. I also took note of the choice of words in the tweets. The reference of Kumera, Kumera. That was the slogan that was used in the Mount Kenya region to mobilize voters to turn up in their numbers. The reference to Durakus, these are the Safarians. And it is in reference to how the president's backyard turned up and queued to go and vote for the duo in 2017. And so that question of whether there is no one out of the 8 million people who voted for the Uhuru duo in 2017 that merits the president's support, it also was, in my opinion, the deputy president asking even me. Sort of, even me. Yeah. So even probably asking, so you will support them and not me. That is how I looked at it. And it is probably the beginning of, that total fallout in the Jubilee team. And I spoke to a few members of parliament who attended that meeting, and they were telling me the president's sentiments were triggered by Charity Ngilu, the governor of Kitui. And you remember during the burial of Kalembe Ndile in Kibwezi, Ngilu had mentioned the same thing, that if the NASA team of 2017 does not unite, then watapanda wheelbarrow. Of course, the wheelbarrow is in reference to UDA, the deputy president's political party. And so the president telling them that I've heard what Charity has said, and I say the same thing, that you guys unite, and where you will be, if that is where Kenyans will be, that is where I'll be. If you read it in many words, you can tell where what that direction means.
Jamila.
Yes, that direction means he spoke about what Charity Ngilu said, and the president reacted to that. So according to the president, he said he's been able to do more this time, this second term, than he was the first time. But would the people agree that this term is much better for them in terms of economy and how their lives have been? According to him, he thinks that he has done better than he did in the first term. And then now what Charity Ngilu said, and it has opened this whole kind of worms in the NASA coalition in terms of them uniting or not, with the Kalonzo Musyoka, I think, speaking out very candidly, I think for the first time, saying he's not going to support Raila Odinga for a third time. He did so twice, and they didn't end up in government.
He'd rather retire.
He'd rather retire. So he says maybe he's saying they should now join the one alliance for him. But I think this speaks to how, and then listen to what Charity Ngilu was saying today, saying that we've united before and we've won. And she was talking about the NAC that you mentioned in 2002, where they united behind Mwai Kibaki and they won the election. So you may ask yourself, what were the dynamics then and now? Are there any similarities in terms of how they united behind one candidate then? And if they do it again this time, will they win? But then now it's interesting how also Raila speaks out. I don't know if we have that soundbite. Do we have the soundbite of ODM leader Raila Odinga today, Roba?
Yes.
Yes, please. Let's listen to what he had to say after what Kalonzo Musyoka had said.
Tuko na sababu yukitaka tuingie katika serikali tubadilishe mambo ya Wakenya. Na mimi na Kalonzo hatuwezi kukosana. Tutakubaliana tu. Tutakubaliana tu. Tutasimama pamoja ili tuweze kutoa hawa wezi ambao wanadanganya Wakenya.
Umeona kwamba tunaunda muundo mpya, One Kenya Alliance. Charity, I want you to know, Kalonzo will not run alone. Kwanza Mungu ako pamoja nasi. All right? Tuko na huyu ndugu Raila ambaye tunajuana sana. All those 10 years ya kung'ang'ana bila kuogopa.
Na nyinyi mkikaa hapo mnajua hakuna mmoja wetu peke yake anaweza kuwa rais wa Kenya. Mkikosa kushikana mutashindwa na huyu mtu. Na hatutaki kuingia kwa wheelbarrow. I do not want.
Ati wanataka kuungana ndio washinde Ruto. Mimi nataka niwaambie watafute sera ya mipango ya maendeleo wauze kwa wananchi. Kuungana kushinda mtu haiwezi kusaidia mtu yeyote.
They were speaking, I think that was during the burial of former Member of Parliament Kalembe Ndile. And I don't know if Gashuri and the rest on the table see there was a different Kalonzo who was speaking then and the Kalonzo who was speaking yesterday when he was interviewed by NTV. And there he was saying, I'm not supporting Raila again for the third time. And he blamed ODM quite a bit for the wars that have bedeviled ODM, saying that they didn't do it, and NASA saying they never lived up to the promise that had been made.
But you know, Jamila, I mean, Yvonne, you come in a moment, but it shocks me how categorical politicians can be this early before an election. I mean, I remember probably a year or so before the last election, Yvonne, you talked to Anne Waiguru. That time she had just left the cabinet and everything. And then she said,
on health grounds,
I would never join politics. I'm a professional. Look where we are now. So it shocks me when politicians are this categorical, because I am almost certain that when people now go around the table, that position cannot, the positions that I've heard over the last day or so can't be that hard line. I mean, people go to the table and you will find the same Kalonzo Musyoka might even be promised a cabinet position or something like that. I mean, it just happens in politics that when, you know, it all comes now to real hard negotiations, some positions will give.
But I think we need to see it for what it is, that it's to up the stakes and up the ante and, you know, mobilize and galvanize their people around them. You can then lead them to a point and say, you know, I changed my mind and this is what I did. And it's just to make themselves... For the greater good, for the nation and not for self.
Nation bigger than me.
Being bigger than the individual, which is what Charity Gilu actually said, I believe, to Kalonzo Musyoka, that he should shelve his personal ambition for the nation. And here's another quick one for me. I think the greatest observation from all of this jostling that we're seeing 13 months to the election for one seat, which is the presidential seat. And it's interesting because we thought that the 2010 Constitution, putting in place all of those structures, was to remove this sort of jostling that we're seeing even at a time like now, you know, 13 minutes, 13 hours, 13 months to the election. And it's interesting because, remember, that's when we put in the 50+1, you know, to sort of remove all of this high stakes around the presidency, devolution to the 47 counties that were devolving power downwards. But yet here we still find ourselves at this point, including having a more independent judiciary, the Supreme Court, so that that would be a place we can take our disputes to and not resort to the streets. But what is proving clear from all of this is that even with the formal structures we have in place, that our politics is still heavily personality driven. So for instance, even in 2017, when we had that impasse, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was resolved there. We continued to have a political stalemate even after the Supreme Court had made its decision. But yet, what did it take to resolve that political statement? A personal deal, a handshake between two individuals, rather than all of these structures that we put in place that were to, you know, make this not a be-all, end-all of our elections. But yet here we are again, personality-driven. I will not support this one. I will do this one. Who will do this?
And it's the same personalities.
And it's the same personalities. So it just tells you that, particularly in contexts such as ours in our democracy here, that it'll take a lot more than formal institutions and structures to change, you know, the way our politics is done.
Did you mean it's 13 minutes to 11? But anyway,
that's right.
We need to take a break.
Actually,
right?
It is 13 minutes to 11.
All right, let's take a break. We'll be right back with News Gang.